Good morning, ma'am. Kapila Venu is a practitioner of Koodiyattam and a disciple of the Koodiyattam maestro Guru Ammanur Madhava Chakyar. She is being mentored by Koodiyattam exponent and actor trainer Gopalan Nair Venu, also known as G. Venu, who is also her father. She has also trained under Usha Nangyar and Kitanur C. N. Ramachakyar in Koodiyattam. Nirmala Panikar, her mother, in Mohiniyattam and studied under the guidance of Japanese farmer dancer Min Tanaka in Japan. I'd like to take this opportunity to welcome you to Aya ma'am. Now over for the question answer session.
Okay, so I'm just showing you like a piece of my performance. It's just like the beginning of the performance. So I'll just show it to you for like 2-3 minutes, and then yeah. it was actually just the beginning of a performance. So I am a Koodiyattam practitioner, and as you all know, Koodiyattam is a very, very ancient theatre tradition, and it is both a theatre and a storytelling tradition. There is a very strong element of storytelling. Both male and female performers have storytelling. So the male performers have Chakyar Kutha, which is storytelling used in the regional language in Malayalam through a voice. And Niyar Kutha, which is the female storytelling tradition, which you just saw right now, is storytelling through Abhinaya, through stylized acting. And then we also have the dramatic tradition where we perform plays, several actors. And yes, we can go into the questions maybe.
Yeah. First of all, the question we want to ask Kapila is, we all are people as architects gone through the westernized education systems and school, colleges, and regular learning, doing our jobs. Okay, few of us are lucky to at least see Koodiyattam. Many of us are not lucky to even see the performances. What difference as a person, as a performer, as an artist, do you have to say to these young children or these young architects about learning in this traditional form and knowing these art forms compared to the modern world, modern education? What advice do you have to give from your experience in life?
Wow. I thought you were going to ask me specifically about performing spaces.
Yeah, we would come there, but maybe we can just start there. I'll just get into them right now. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, maybe we can just start from your experience of learning and what advice you have to offer to these kids, and yeah, that's all.
Well, I definitely think education has to be very balanced, and you need both roots and ways. So I definitely am a person who believes that education needs to stay in touch with traditional knowledge systems, and that any stream of education, I think, like especially the art, even architecture, I mean, there is so much, I mean, you know better than me how much wealth there is in the traditional system that, you could use. So I think from point of view of, like, I can say from like the performance spaces, like Koodiyattam was always performed in Kootambalams. And as a performer, I have had very few opportunities to perform inside a Kootambalam because I don't belong to the Nangyar community. So I've had like maybe 3 or 4 opportunities to perform inside a proper Kootambalam. But I can only say that, this is the ideal space for which this art form has been designed. So the acoustics are perfect, and the distance, the height of the stage is very precisely calculated form. And the audience are sitting at the right distance, and the stage itself has that extra roof where the actor feels completely protected to perform, because as you might have seen in the video, it's a very subtle and very nuanced kind of acting, and it must be watched from very close in the light of an oil lamp. And so so this Kootambalam is like almost like the perfect example of a great performance space. So yeah, I hope that studying traditional arts and each art form, each traditional art form has a different requirement. Like if you look at Puratanatakam, for instance, or Kathakali. Kathakali cannot probably, maybe a Kutambalam is not the most ideal location for a Kathakali performance. The level, the sound levels are different, and Kathakali addresses a much larger, audience, and they're completely different things. And if you do any traditional art form has a different, set of requirements. So I definitely think if an architect is trying to build a performance space, he or she needs to be very acquainted with the different needs of different performers. Yeah.
And I think we'll go to the next question. Thanks for that answer, Kapila. And that question is from Arya Manoj.
Koodiyattam has been performed from a long time, and its story origins are mainly from the and even though it has Tamil and Malayalam language influences, I guess the text is made mainly Sanskrit. So what is the scope? Is there any scope of addition for storylines into this art form? And what are the creative additions that the artist can bring into the performance?
So Koodiyattam is generally like traditionally production of dramas written in the Sanskrit language. So Sanskrit literature and literature for theatre was very, very much in vogue in the Indian subcontinent at a certain time, and these plays travel to the different parts of the country, and Koodiyattam is like a performance style that evolved from trying to produce these plays using theatre techniques that were already in practice here, and taking influence from the texts and from the mainstream tradition and everything put together. It's like a blend of both the Margi and the Deshi traditions. So the aesthetics are very regional, the theatre very regional. The texts are originally Sanskrit. So in the beginning, there were texts coming in from the north, and then later we had our own poets, or our own playwrights who wrote plays. So this is the traditional repertoire, and producing a play in Koodiyattam basically requires a text in Sanskrit, after which a Malayalam actor's manual called the Atta Prakaram is written. And then a stage manual called the Kramadipika is also created, and then the play is produced. But as of now, what happens is when you want to produce something new, this has always been happening, especially in the last few decades. A lot of experimentation with new texts have been happening by almost all practitioners of Koodiyattam. They've tried to create new performances. The usual procedure would be to translate the text from whichever language. So if you're doing Tagore or Shakespeare or whatever other text that you want to produce in a Koodiyattam style, you translate it into Sanskrit and then follow the same procedure of creating an Atta Prakaram and a Kramadipika, and you make the performance. So yes, it is a possibility. But as of now, we still stick to using the Sanskrit language as the main language for chanting, for reciting. But now slowly we are also trying to other languages like Tamil for chanting.
Okay.
I hope that answers.
Yeah, thank you, Kapila. And I think there are a couple of questions from Saumya Pandey. I hope she's also there. I'd like to ask if she is there.
Yeah, thank you. So Kapila, I think I read up on your experience of being at the Body Weather Farm for a while. And so I'm very curious. I mean, intuitively, I feel there is a connection between the art forms that are practiced in Japan and in some ways, intuitively with what's done in Kerala. So did you connect? How did you connect with those elements? Yeah.
For me, actually, traveling and living in Japan was a personal journey. So I met this very wise master from Japan. His name is Min Tanaka. And he is actually not a practitioner of any traditional Japanese art form, performing art. He is actually a very avant-garde performer, and he is heavily, his practice by, the Buto practice. And he was a disciple of Tatsumi Hijikata-san, who was one of the founders of, the Buto movement. And he himself believed very strongly in practicing agriculture as a ways of, he believed that art and nature needs to be deeply connected. And for him, architecture and the ways of working with the body and, the mind and the hands and, directly involving your body in working with the of nature was a way to create a communication in nature and the human and the artist. And it was very interesting for me because they lived a communal life and they practiced agriculture for a living, and dance was their practice. So I went once, and I happened to run into this, this commune, and I then later went back several times to study and live there, basically because I was inspired by this, the very hard, how it is in Japan, like it's very intense, the culture and the passion with which they do anything. And the work culture is very intense, like a very almost the opposite of what we have in India. We are much more laid back and calm about time and things like that. Whereas it's a very strong and strict discipline and a lot of hard work. And we were living in a commune where we had really had very little privacy. We were all living together, cooking together, farming together, and practicing together and everything. So this was like a whole thing that I did. And it was what I took back from that was like basically Min-san was inspiring for me because he believed that the very traditional and the very avant-garde can easily meet. And it's everything that is in the middle that is like difficult to touch upon. He always felt that the two extremes were very similar. And he had a great respect for traditional or like ritual or performing arts. And I had the same respect back. And there were so many things that we could communicate on. Just as a performer though, his training was very, very dynamic. He involved like several things, like several aspects of performance, like the dynamics of concentration and, yes, just the communication with the nature and everything, the whole intensity of performance, everything I took from there, I definitely think has influenced my own performance as an artist.
Yeah, I think so too, that somewhere, the two extremes sort of connect. And it's like a full circle that you...
Yeah.
Thank you.
I think Soumya had one more question, right?
Oh, okay, I can ask that too.
Yes.
So
yes.
I think, as a dancer, how do you visualize your space? Like, do you paint visually in a spatial thing through your body? I mean, how do you, I do understand that, your practice has lesser movement as such. But I'm sure there is this whole thing that you do with your body and this space sort of coming together, even in the larger sense of, learning and practicing. Yeah.
So as a performer, I think I have mostly been an actor than a dancer, like you rightly said. And I have actually never had the image of painting in space when I move. So that's something that I don't relate to when people, a lot of dancers say that, but it's something that I don't really relate to, but like my relationship to space, which is also very influenced by Minsan, is basically how to keep feeling the space and the audience when you're on stage. So it's like, so just sensing the space and feeling the space around you and feeling the audience. These are all like multiple threads, and sending your awareness. So for example, a lot of time we have to be very aware of the space, in the sense that your vision is very limited, or you have to move in the space. In tricky spaces, you have to find your balance, or your let's say, you have to make your presence be felt, no matter what kind of space you are put in. So it's that, constant negotiation where it's like being aware of the space, and sending these threads to all directions, and like sensing this, all the objects and the people and everything in the space. So it's, for me, more like that I relate to space. And I'm very space sensitive, even though like I had to perform in all kinds of spaces, and even very uncomfortable spaces. I think it always makes a huge difference when the space is good, is conducive. Yeah.
Yeah. Then I have a couple of questions from myself. One is, Koodiyattam is a 2,000-year-old performance, art performance, and then now a lot of it involved a lot of social systems, caste systems, traditions, which possibly allowed this transfer of knowledge for these past 2,000 years. How do you see it in future? Can it continue? World is changing, the global scenario is changing. What do you see as a future for Koodiyattam? Of course, there is give and take, which happens with theater, but as a tradition, can it continue? Will it be better? Or what is your personal take on this?
I definitely think this tradition will continue very well, because even in the next generation after us, there are a lot of very talented, very enthusiastic young, young students studying and working and everything. So I definitely think that this the future is like good. It looks good to me. So we are now in a place where we have practitioners who are both from the traditional families and from other communities. And in most groups, you can see that both these practitioners work side by side. And the traditional practitioners from the families still do their ritual performances in some of the temples where it's still being continued. And in other spaces, they work together with non-traditional performers. And there is this whole constant debate on whether the traditional Kootambalams must be open for all performers and must become secular spaces where everybody can perform and everybody can watch as well. Because now only in most temples still non-Hindus are not allowed to enter. And there is even a Kootambalam where women are not allowed to enter, if I'm not mistaken, in Kottayur. Not in Kottayur, sorry, in, I forget that space.
Okay.
Okay. Anyway,
Okay.
so it's still restricted, and it still has all those, restrictions on one hand, but on the other hand, we need to respect that this is a family tradition that's been going on for 2,000 years at least. And at least for a few centuries, it's been in certain families practiced like a family hereditary profession. So I can imagine that as a traditional performer, one feels very threatened and sensitive towards opening the spaces up for other for practitioners from other communities. So it's a very sensitive topic. But my wish for the future is that think beyond caste, and that Kootambalams become more secular, at least for the audiences. And I genuinely wish that more spaces come up, more beautiful spaces come up in other parts of in the world, where, or in Kerala itself. So that, because we are really in very uncomfortable spaces too often, that it's like negatively impacting the art. For example, bad lighting puts us in very difficult position, because you have to still create some kind of an ambience, and the actors overworking, trying to do something or the other to work within this like very blinding lights and these horrible stages, and you still have to make a performance some kind of a success. It's very stressful. So yeah.
Okay, thank you.
I have another question. When we are performing, like you said, there are many different variations coming in, because you're adapting from Shakespeare and stuff. So does the stage space keep varying? Are we designing the stage for this much number of variations?
Actually, our the Koodiyattam stage and the props that we use are very minimalistic. Like, we just have a bare stage with the mirror at the back, the oil lamp in the front, a wooden stool, and some props, like some weapons made of wood, like the sword, the bow and arrow, and maybe like a mace, or like some very few props. But otherwise, we do not have any sets. We have very basic things. For example, we just spread a white cloth on the stage and it can become a chariot. Or sometimes we hold a piece of silk over somebody's head, and then that becomes like a, like how, I don't know how you say that in English, like that, like a very royal decoration or something. We use very, very few things occasionally, and sometimes for very grand entries, we sometimes use an umbrella, alavattam and jamaram. These are like the decorations that you see on the top of the elephant during temple festivals in Kerala. This big ornamented umbrella, and those round plates with peacock feathers and fly whisk. So sometimes we use props like that, but otherwise the stage is basically, the setting is the same for any performance. So we don't use stage settings as such, very basic changes to the stage. Yeah.
Ma'am, behind, was it Miravu, Chengala and Edekya? Are there any more instruments?
We have Miravu, Kurithalam, Nachengala, Edekya, and sometimes Timila, and sometimes Kurungural.
I wanted to ask that the art form has the title from UNESCO as the masterpiece of oral and intangible heritage. So has this title affected or helped in any way in general construct of the art form in today's time?
I think, like somebody has actually done a PhD on the effect of the UNESCO declaration on Koodiyattam as an art form, or is at least in the process of doing that. Basically, I can just say that it's definitely brought a lot of international attention, especially when it was first declared. Like, a lot of people became curious about the art form, and so on. Also because it was the first one, it was the first set of art forms that UNESCO had declared. There were 18 art forms, I think. And that was the first time UNESCO ever made that kind of a declaration. So yes, there was a lot of attention, but what happened was there was also lots of misconceptions, and lots of people misunderstood that the UNESCO was now going to have all sorts of projects, or something like that. And yeah, so it was also a little bit misleading and confusing for a lot of practitioners. But I can just generally say that yes, there has been that attention. And even now, when you talk about Koodiyattam and you say, when you're introducing the art form, that this was declared by UNESCO, I mean, you use it as like a proud moment to say that. But yeah.
So I wanted to ask this question, that I've been in touch with Kathakali and Chakyar Kutha, in which you have the opportunity to improvise individual artists. So in this art form, how much can you do that? Is there a bracket raising on point to capture the audience, and like, you know, if you see Koodiyattam or even Nelliyodashan, you have like, there are particular things that, you know, captures you, even like an amateur, like who doesn't know Kathakali or Chakyar or anything that much.
So Koodiyattam is basically a form which gives the actor a lot of freedom, because the music is not composed, it's completely improvised music. So the musicians are constantly following the movements of the actors. So I think more than any other art form, the scope for improvisation and interpretation and content is a lot. There is a lot of scope for that in Koodiyattam. And that's why Koodiyattam performances are very elaborate, and depending on the actor's skill can go on for hours and hours and hours and days and days and days, precisely because there is that scope for the individual actor to bring in, you know, whatever they can according to their caliber. So yes, there is, but it's not. It is not an art form that is very that has that element of entertainment like Kathakali does. It is you have to watch it with you know, a different on a different level. The acting, I would say, is you need to have a more meditative kind of energy to enjoy Koodiyattam. It may not have this kind of capturing moments in the sense that, I mean, of course, I think I believe there are, but I don't know, for a beginner, maybe it's not very captivating in the beginning. It can be, yeah, challenging. It's slow. Very slow
Ma'am, I
progression.
have a question. Am I audible?
Yeah.
As a performer, do you think that the way these art forms are perceived has changed in the last few years, say a decade ago or more? Like, people are more curious, or do they understand it less?
That's a very difficult question to answer in general, because I think it's really different. When you say people, I think different kinds of people find interest in different things over time. So for example, in my experience, I think over the last 2 decades when I've been performing, I've often found like a lot of interest in like urban youth, like young people in Bangalore or Delhi or Bombay being very interested in like something like Koodiyattam and finding like or like Drupad or things like that, finding lots of, you know, depth and like being very interested to learn and practice and watch and everything. So I have that experience, but I think there are other sections of society that have lost interest over the years. Our local audiences, for example, have really dwindled. We just have like a group of old uncles who come to watch, who've always been coming to watch, but for our local performances, the audience is very, very like you know, not improving in that sense. So yeah, so it's very different in different parts of the world and different contexts. But I definitely think Spick McKay, for example, has contributed a lot in creating interest in young people.
I have a question which is in line with what you have answered just now. So I've read in an interview that you've told about the next generation of artists being set free from the constraints of the tradition. So I'm just stressing on that word tradition, that they can explore multitude of possibilities. That's what you said. So I think I understand it generally. You have talked about art forms, but when it comes to Koodiyattam, which is a very classical art form and has a very strict framework, or like you told, Atta Prakarams or whatever, within which it has to be learned and taught. When we compare it with any other folk art forms like Teyyam or like Purattanadagam, which you have just mentioned, how do you take this, those which is generally very liberal in that sense, gives a lot of room for improvisation, variety, etc. So how do you take that train or a potential when considering the coming new generation?
The way I see it, what I might have said was that if I were to groom a generation and I had all the freedom to, teach them in the way I want, I would teach them everything I know and everything they should know, facilitate the learning. But I would definitely, as a teacher, say to explore, because the form itself has so much possibility. It's a rich theater language. The aesthetics have so much possibility. Don't think, for example, we are taught in a tradition where we were very restricted. So whenever we wanted to innovate, we were always my teachers were to say that no, you have to preserve the tradition, and that is more important. So when we question things like gender inequality or like that we were uncomfortable with, we were not so encouraged in those days to embrace such changes. But I think if I were in a position where I had the power to say to the next generation, I would definitely just set them free. I would make sure they know everything they need to know, and they would understand the tradition well and all the nuances, the techniques well, but I think I would want to set them free.
Thank you. I think this is also a kind of dilemma which we as architects are in when we, consider tradition, whether we have to preserve tradition or to continue tradition. So something similar, right?
Yeah.
There is another question, Aishwarya.
So this is kind of in continuation of what you had just spoken about. So how have these collaborations in like ballet or other performances where you kind of interact with multidisciplinary dancers and then collaborate to create a single performance? So how has that influenced you as an artist?
I don't want to talk about ballet, but I think I have had the, wonderful, I've been very fortunate to interact with and work in collaborative artists from different, let's say like experimental dancer or theater practitioners or Main-san from Japan. So I definitely think that whenever you work with some, a tradition or a form that is completely different from yours, you just come back with very fresh perspectives. You see your own tradition in completely new life. And it's also very liberating to understand that other people have made all these different kinds of experiments, have had all these experiences that are so different from your own, world. It's often very liberating, and it's often gives you a lot of courage to experiment within a tradition. So I think it's very important. For me, it's been personally very important. Go out and meet other artists and work with them.
Thank you.
What are you working on now, and what kind of space do you dream for it, since this is an architectural forum?
Oh, what am I working on now? I'm not working on anything specific now. With lockdown, it's like I have my hands full. But in the long term, there is something on the back of my mind. I'm working with some Tamil poetry on a solo performance. So what kind of space? I have very specific ideas about my ideal space. I am a huge fan of thatched roofs and mud floors and very, very minimalistic spaces. So that's what I have in mind.
So if we were to curate you at a festival in New York, how would you envision transforming a standard proscenium stage to what would work for Koodiyattam?
Very quickly, I can say that it would be nice if it's an intimate space, a small space, and not a very high stage, so that people don't have to look very high. And lighting can do a lot. I think good lighting can make a lot of difference.
Thank you, Kapila. These are real life problems for curators, performers. So I hope the future architects are listening keenly on how to make performance spaces more friendly for Indian classical performance.
I believe you have performed in spaces where one does not know the culture of Kerala or does not know the tradition. So, what do you think the audience connects to in that? Like, they don't know anything about Koodiyattam, or they don't know any part of the language or what the story also. No like idea of the story also. What do you think they connect to, or do you feel uncomfortable in such spaces where they don't understand you?
I think I'm most comfortable in such spaces where the audience doesn't understand anything. And it's also very diverse what each audience takes from a performance. So there are audiences where you give them like a completely, very elaborate lecture demonstration, and you explain the story and the language, and they watch and they understand. And often they all come up with the thing that, emotions are universal, relationships are universal. And because we are telling stories, complexities are universal, love is universal. So they often understand. But I've also been in audiences where they do not want to know the story. So there was one performance space in New York where I was told, we don't want to know what you're doing. We just want to enjoy the physicality and the emotional intensity. For example, there are also people like that. So it's, I don't feel uncomfortable at all in space. Don't understand. Often it's much more generosity in such spaces from the audience, as opposed to people who know the art form very well, or who are like very self, how do you say, connoisseurs. And such audiences, it's a different matter. You have to be like the other audiences are actually often liberating again. Yeah.
I so appreciate that answer. It's so lovely when things are just taken for what they are, rather than the audience. It's very real, isn't it? It's rather than people bringing a whole load of knowledge to it. When you do connect on that level, I'm sure it's very satisfying. Yeah.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yeah. Yeah. I think I have one last question for Kapila, and that's again connected to architect. Again, as an architect, I think in the new generation, very few of us, I might be lucky that I could do some work in Narnaka really long back, which kind of, at least I could see some performances. But otherwise, most of us don't get a chance to see Koodiyattam or experience what's there. So how do you think we can, as from an architect, can connect with each other? And uh, what is your advice to young architects like this who are there in this whole group, to Kapila? And also, if possible, you can possibly show or something to close the show. I don't know. It's up to you. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm really not good at advice, but I can just say that I have, like, including you, friends from the field of architecture, and I've often felt that it's very heartwarming when architects actually take interest in the performer's needs and are trying to understand the form when they're trying to build something. And I think that communication is very important. I definitely think, for example, that that we need to have, the traditions need to live on, but they also need to adapt and transform and be more inclusive and secular and all of that. And we all know that architects and artists really need to keep in touch and figure out how we can find ideal spaces, create ideal spaces that are secular and inclusive and interesting and aesthetic and everything. So yes, let's keep the communication going.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Kapila, for coming us. So there's a lot of work for all you young architects here. You can do space and interact with all these great artists. Thanks so much again.